Guild Wars 2. Love it or hate it, it's here to stay.
Well, that depends on who you ask. If you believe some of the comments on YouTube, it died months ago.
ArenaNet has stated previously that their ultimate goal is to be the #1 MMO on the market. However, even the most die-hard Guild Wars 2 fan knows there are things holding it back from reaching this goal.
So we put together not only a list of the top 10 things we think Guild Wars 2 needs to improve, but also some suggestions to fix these problems, along with examples that have helped games with similar problems in the past.
And yes, that does mean we'll be mentioning World of Warcraft.
So if you're offended by Guild Wars 2 fans saying good things about World of Warcraft, you should probably stop watching now.
I'm Kaaboose.
And I'm Tex, and this is the Top 10 Things Guild Wars 2 Needs to Improve. Number 10.
Take a guess what this is an advertisement for.
Considering the title of this video, that's not going to be very hard.
True. However, having this thrown at you with no context, you'd have no idea what you were watching until the end. And even then, you get that whole, what the fuck did I just watch feeling?
Yeah, it certainly didn't make me want to go out and buy it.
Poor advertising comes in right at the bottom at number 10 because, while advertising your game is important for sales, it's of little concern to people who have already bought the game. Also, Guild Wars 2 is already known throughout MMO circles.
It's hard to try and claim,
No one's ever heard of Guild Wars 2.
while you're telling us how much better World of Warcraft is.
However, for a game that's trying to cater to non-MMO gamers as well, you can't throw together something like this, full of vague symbolism that only people who know about your company's design goals are going to understand, and then expect consumers to jump at it.
If there's one thing World of Warcraft does better than Guild Wars 2, it's advertise. They may be using big names to sell their product.
I'm Mr. T.
My name is Vern Troyer.
I'm William Shatner.
I'm Chuck Norris.
What's your game?
But they are telling you about their world, who you can be, and what you can do. In this case, Guild Wars 2 should look to World of Warcraft for some ideas on how to better promote their game.
I'm honestly shocked at how bad the official advertisement for Guild Wars 2 turned out when you look at all the amazing teaser clips we got in the time leading up to the release of the game. An edited version of the manifesto clip would have worked better than this crap. It's a good thing this came out after I purchased Guild Wars 2. I haven't been put off buying something by an advertisement this much since that third place advertisement for the PS2.
I never saw that.
Welcome to the third place.
What the fuck? Number 9.
Coming in at number 9 is World vs. World. For many, this is THE end game of Guild Wars 2.
Ugh, not me. I hated being forced to do it to complete my monthly achievements. Shouldn't that have fallen under PvP?
At least World vs. World hasn't been mandatory since the introduction of Laurels and the overhaul to the daily achievement system. Considering structured PvP has its own achievements now, I don't see why World vs. World shouldn't. There's an improvement right there.
Shouldn't you cover the problems before suggesting solutions?
I should. There are two big problems with World vs. World at the moment. The first problem is that the sides can be, at times, terribly unbalanced. Until recently, most weekly World vs. World matches followed the same pattern, one side completely destroying the other two. I really wish there was some kind of diplomacy system where if one side is dominating the other two could team up against them, even if that meant forfeiting the match. Guerrilla warfare when you're getting trounced is fun and all, but World vs. World really shines when it comes to epic battles and sieges. Although, if they did allow the two losing sides to team up, it would mix up the strategies a bit.
Like the blue shell in Mario Kart. Do we risk staying out in front and incur the wrath of those behind, or do we stay with the pack and charge out at the last moment?
It would sure stop the start of the week being the be-all and end-all of the game. Once one side gets a comfortable lead, the other two tend to give up. It could also lead to some really amazing battles. A team that had a huge lead might be fighting a losing battle against two sides, but so long as they can hold enough points to maintain that lead by the end of the week, they'd still win. It would really make the end of the week more exciting instead of, man, I wish World vs. World would hurry up and reset.
What's the second problem?
The second problem is culling. That is, sometimes in these great battles, player models do not load up until the enemy are right on top of you. Sometimes the first warning you have that the enemy are even there is you're flat on your ass.
That's a pretty game-breaking problem. How come you didn't mention that first?
Because ArenaNet have been working on this problem since the game's release, and they've announced in the upcoming patch on March 26th that it'll be completely removed from the game and replaced with a better system.
So that's it?
Pretty much. Now that the free realm transfers have been removed, we're seeing a little less of the one-sided gangfests, but they still happen in one form or another. The new breakout events they've added are also a lot of fun. ArenaNet have been working on World vs. World constantly since its release, and they seem to be on track to fixing these problems on their own. But it still makes the list because until it's actually working, it's still broken in my books.
Number 8.
Coming in at number 8 is Loot and Magic Find.
This used to be much higher up on the list until the most recent patch, which put the world boss chests on a day cooldown but has them dropping significantly better loot.
Which is what we'd suggested in an earlier draft of this video anyway. I really need to get off my ass and make these things faster.
Yes, it shows your ideas for improvements and A-nets aren't that far apart.
True. However, there are still plenty of gripes I have with the loot system. For example, here's the Shatterer. Guild Wars 2's equivalent of a raid boss, yet it drops the same loot as any other creature out in the world. Look at him! Can you imagine using a shard of him as some kind of a weapon or shield?
It's the same nearly everywhere in the game. Almost no bosses drop loot specific to them or their dungeon.
This also causes a problem as it means players' only incentive to fight these bosses without specific loot being offered is gold. So players are going to seek out the bosses that take the least amount of time and effort to kill while avoiding the more challenging ones.
Does anybody need anything off this guy, or can we bypass him?
I think Leroy needs something from this guy.
And since loot is the same everywhere, this compounds the problem with having a Magic Find stat within the game.
I've seen plenty of items with Magic Find. What's the problem?
The problem is that to have Magic Find on an item, you need to sacrifice other stats in order to obtain it. This means that characters running Magic Find gear are statistically weaker than someone who isn't. The amount of statistical disadvantage you have is proportionate to the amount of Magic Find you are currently running.
So you make yourself weaker for a chance at better loot.
Guild Wars 2 is usually played in groups. This means, statistically, someone running a Magic Find set is going to be less helpful to a group than someone who isn't. And that player is being rewarded, statistically, with better loot than the other members of a group who are not.
It sucks that the player doing the least amount of work is getting the best reward.
Exactly! Magic Find should be disabled in dungeons and meta events. Not only that, but I believe ANET should make it known to other players when a party member is running these stats. I can understand this stat existing for the purposes of farming, but it should not be at the expense of other players. At the very least, an inspect function or some way of letting other players know they are running with someone running Magic Find needs to be implemented.
So what would you suggest?
Along with the regular trash loot, put in some stuff unique to the event. It doesn't have to drop every time, there just needs to be incentive to seek out a particular challenge for its rewards. And speaking of challenge, make the desirability of the loot that drops proportionate to the challenge of the event. You need an element of risk versus reward to keep players interested in the more challenging stuff.
Yes, especially with things like jumping puzzles. A gold at the end of Matrikia's puzzle would actually make me want to go through that hell more than once.
I'd love more incentive to do things like that as they can be a lot of fun.
If you want an example of good loot management within a game, you can't really go past World of Warcraft. Or at least what it was like before everything got dumbed down.
Number 7!
Coming in at number 7 is the personal story.
ANET spent a lot of time leading up to release telling us how amazing the personal story in Guild Wars 2 is, and to be honest, at first it's great, so long as you choose a race that appeals to you. The problem with the personal story is the longer it goes on, the less personal it gets. And while some of this can be attributed to the later missions having less polish and being the same no matter what choices you made prior, the major gripe I have is the characters. Just like the story in Guild Wars 1, Guild Wars 2 has characters we love and hate.
It's me, boys. Come here. I ain't got no eyes, so I can't help you no more.
You never helped us.
However, it's not the characters themselves that bother me, it's their lack of involvement in the story overall. Once you clear your race's personal story and move on to your order, most of the characters you've met up with and interacted with at that point, they may as well not have existed. Most are never heard from again, and the few that do make little, if any, acknowledgement that you ever had anything to do with them. The same thing goes when your order's storyline is finished.
You seem to be taking this rather personally.
Of course I am! This was supposed to be my personal story after all. It's a bit hard to call it a personal story when it ends up being the same as everyone else's.
But doesn't it have to have a similar ending point since it's an MMO?
Yes, it does, but that's no excuse that all the choices you make boil down to just choosing which missions you will play. It's possible to have an ending that every player eventually reaches while still delivering a unique experience to each player. Let's use The Witcher as an example. Two people playing that game will, for the most part, travel through the same locations and will get the same overall ending no matter what choices they make. However, both will most likely make different choices regarding the characters they meet as they play, and these characters or others associated with them will make return appearances to help or hinder their progress throughout the game, particularly coming up to the final act. Also, the Witcher games wrap up the choices made and the effects they had on the characters involved in an end cutscene montage. Heavy Rain is another great example of this, though that game did have multiple endings.
I assume there's a point to all this?
Yes, my point is that all the characters in the story are a big part of the experience. I could forgive all the paths and missions becoming the same towards the end if the characters I met early on participated in the final acts. That would help it feel more personal. I'd also like it if we could interact with these characters a bit more rather than just choosing branching paths. Also, I'd like some closure on these characters. The ending celebration scene would have been the perfect opportunity for this, but instead, all we get is a bunch of generic NPCs waving at us in Destiny's Edge.
Oh please, you rant on all that and you're not going to rant about the climax of the story?
That falls under point number 6, and I was going to move right on to that, but something happened to one of my characters regarding his personal story the other day that just blew me away.
And you haven't shut up about it since. Minor spoiler alert here, guys.
My Char, the Balrog, recently completed a set of missions that involved liberating Demi Beetlestone from her father Cordicus. He was wandering around the Harathi hinterlands minding his own business when suddenly this happened.
Cordicus sent us to thank you for stealing his daughter.
It wasn't until after the fight had finished I realised exactly what had just happened. My personal story had had an effect on the open world. This is exactly what ANET promised in their manifesto. Why is this the only instance of this happening? This is what Guild Wars 2 could do to set itself apart from other MMOs. Just imagine it for a second. Events across the open world that can only be triggered by people who have done certain things in their personal story, but anyone can participate in. Gods, if I even thought for a second ANET would listen to me and implement this, I'd shift personal story all the way up to point number 2.
Calm down, Cab.
But just think about it. There are plenty of people complaining that the experience they gain in their home areas is too low for them to stay there and level, so they have to go to other zones to level up and then return to complete their personal story. ANET could add events that can only be triggered by players that have done certain things with their personal story, and other players could then join in. There could even be dialogue between the NPCs and the player character for other players to hear.
It'd be nice to see the NPCs from my personal story out in the open world and be able to complete events with them. But what if another player who also met the criteria started at first? Wouldn't that break immersion?
Good point, but couldn't ArenaNet make it so that players who also meet the criteria hear slightly different dialogue? For example, Player A, an Iron Legion Char, has started an event with a Warband member. Player B, also an Iron Legion Char, shows up mid-event. The Warband member could make an apology for going AWOL to Player B that only Player B can hear, and then ask for Player B's help. From then onwards, every time Player A has verbal dialogue, Player B hears or sees that dialogue come from himself, while Player A and other players in the area hear or see that dialogue between the NPC and Player A.
I guess that works, but what about NPCs who die or move on from that area as the story progresses? Wouldn't seeing another player start this event destroy the immersion?
It would, and I do have a solution to it, but I'll cover that in point 5. For now, onwards to point 6. Number 6.
Number 6 on our list of things Guild Wars 2 need to improve are the dungeons. And boy are these things a mess.
I'll say, and while I know many of you will be saying, it's because there's no Holy Trinity, the real reason is this: lack of testing, polish, and in some cases just plain bad or incomplete designs.
Why is it that some bosses have little variety to their attacks?
Why do some do almost no damage, making them little threat, but have so much health they take 10 minutes to kill?
And why are there bosses that can kill you in one hit with little or no warning?
For example, the Golem boss in Cordicus Manor Story has an AoE attack that can one-shot with no animation. The second last boss in Crucible of Eternity is another one-shot bastard that gives a small cue as to what he'll do, but no indication who he's firing at. Good luck seeing this if you're at range.
We're not saying one-shot mechanics are bad. They can be great fun if handled correctly. Just look at the final boss in the Jade Fractal.
That's a boss in the Fractals though, and I must say for the most part the Fractals dungeons are great. This should be the bar for dungeon design.
Some of the dungeons have way too many trash mobs. It gets really repetitive fighting the same thing over and over again. It gets to the point that it's expected of you while you're in a pug to skip or bug a mob, even if it borders on exploitation.
And some more vocals on the bosses would help too, not just with the personality of the boss, but as a warning to their signature attacks.
Speaking of personality, I love the feel of the dungeons and the stories behind them. It almost makes up for poor design.
Yes, but you can't have one without the other. The perfect example of this is Ara, the final mission/dungeon of the personal story. Spoiler alert here guys, we're going to go into the final fight of the game, but to be honest, we're doing you a favour letting you know in advance the torture you're going to have to endure.
How did they make fighting a dragon so boring?
Simple. The whole thing is unfinished. The whole dungeon has graphical glitches galore, slow and expansive trash sections, bosses with almost no mechanics to them, with the standout being the dragon himself.
Not only do you engage the dragon with nothing but a cannon,
If your cannon is even working,
but for most of the fight the boss does nothing. It's like shooting a wall for 10 minutes.
it's like they started designing this fight, and then 20% through were like, oh, we better work on another part of the game for a bit and then come back to this. And they never did. ArenaNet, you promised this fight would be epic. How can you call this epic? Yes, the set piece is pretty cool, but not once does this world-destroying dragon seem even the least bit threatening.
You know something's wrong when the most threatening thing in a boss battle is the implication of tentacle rape.
Oh god, it's Graboids, look out!
I've seen enough hentai to know where this is going.
Tex, look out!
Oh god.
Tentacles!
Wait, where? You heard. Oh god, what?
Even if we fought him from a ship, you could have done so much more with this. We could have controlled the cannons during the initial engagement.
You could have made him lunge for the cannon that crippled him and have us fight what was left of him on the ship.
The ship could have plummeted towards the Earth with us trying to fend off Zaitan while regaining control, ending with a spectacular crash landing.
Then as the dust clears, we see what's left of Zaitan trying to regenerate, and we engage in a final hand-to-hand fight to finish him off.
Thanks to your bundle system and physics, you can do almost anything with the bosses in this game. The only limitations are imagination, effort, and time.
I hate to say it, but World of Warcraft does a much better job with its bosses and dungeons, even when fighting bosses that are pretty much part of the scenery.
But it doesn't mean that Guild Wars 2 should give up. Work harder on your fights, make them more involved, and in some cases more complicated. You showed us the tip of the iceberg with what you can do with the Fractals dungeons. Expand on that. Fix the original dungeons,
Especially Zaitan, for fuck's sake!
then show us what you can really do. Number 5 is Alive.
Number 5 covers guesting and realms. Heads up, because Kaaboose has quite a lot to say on this one.
Sure do, because I believe ANET is missing some huge potential to improve their game in this area, considering the way their game is structured. You can chat to a player in another realm, send mail to them, do dungeons with them, even join their realm temporarily through the guesting system. Why do the realms even exist? When you're in a party with someone who is in the overflow, you can right-click their portrait and select Join Player to be put in their overflow version of the zone. Why not do away with realms altogether in PvE and just have as many overflows of each zone as necessary? This way the areas of the game that are less popular will still be populated.
So somewhere like Lion's Arch would have lots of overflows, and say Mount Maelstrom would have few?
Exactly! Realms could be used for world versus world only. This could be used to spread out the player populations more evenly across the realms for world versus world, and this could even solve the off-peak dilemma in world versus world as well. Realms that have been unofficially designated as oceanic, for example, have an advantage during the off-peak hours, as there is little opposition unless their opponents are also oceanic. If the amount of players allowed in World vs. World was less during Oceanic Prime Time, Oceanic players would have to spread across the realms to avoid World vs. World queues. This cannot be done now because doing so would force Oceanic players who want to do PvE as well, choosing between long World vs. World queues or deserted PvE maps.
And deserted PvE maps would be a thing of the past with an overflow-based system. But wouldn't this make it harder to adventure with friends and guildies?
Not if the system was implemented correctly. For example, let's say you're entering a new zone. When choosing which overflow you are sent to, the client could use an algorithm like this. Let's say you enter the portal to a zone. The first thing the algorithm will check for is to see if there are any party members in an overflow of that zone. If there are, it puts you in the overflow with the party member. If not, it'll check to see if you have any friends in an overflow. If there are, you go into the overflow with the most friends. If there aren't, it checks to see if there are any guild members in any of the overflows. If there are, you go to the overflow with the most guild members. If not, it'll simply choose the overflow with the most members from your realm.
This could be used to space out players across many overflows during massive one-time events.
And lastly, a system like this could be used for player immersion as well. The dilemma we had with personal story NPCs who died or moved on from their zones could be solved with a system like this. All that would have to be done would be to have different versions of each zone. For example, we have a personal story event with an NPC that dies later on in the story. Players who have passed this point of the story will be sent to a zone where the NPC's events would not exist, maybe even with different ones in his place. Whilst players who had yet to witness this NPC's death within the personal story would instead be sent to a version of the zone where this NPC had events that could be triggered and participated within, either by themselves or by another player. All this would give a much better illusion of a living, breathing world that changes because of your actions.
That does sound cool, and you still have the option of joining friends who are behind you in the story. That's much better than getting separated, like in WoW's phasing system.
Indeed, and there is so much more that could be done with this, such as being placed into zones with large meta events or world bosses that are on shorter cooldowns if you haven't done them recently.
But what if someone wanted to farm a world boss for a rare item? It seems like a lot of trouble finding an overflow where the boss is about to spawn with a system like that.
Well, players could be given the option to set preferences for which overflows they'd like to join. For example, joining overflows where world bosses are on a shorter cooldown. Players on low-end systems could even be given an option to join overflows with fewer players for less strain on their system. Alternatively, players could be given the option to manually choose which overflow they would like to join as well.
Just like the districts in Guild Wars 1.
Yep, and I'd love to hear players' thoughts on my ideas of abolishing realms altogether. I know a lot of players might be against it because they feel their realm is their community. Personally, I've always found my guild is my community within an MMO, though I'm sure some will disagree. Anyway, onwards to point 4. Number 4.
You know, it would be much less impressive if it showed the army standing just to the left.
Oh, what I wouldn't give to see this thing mobile! I guarantee that'd spread the players out a bit.
Coming in at number 4, events. They're ANET's pride and joy, but there's no denying they could use some improvement.
First up, I want to cover the bosses. Far too many of them do not have fail states and as such are guaranteed to result in victory. Not having the possibility of failure really removes the tension in an encounter. To make matters worse, the ones that do are usually too easy to screw up or borderline unfair.
The Grenth statue event comes to mind. This can be failed by standing in the wrong place, since the NPC you have to protect can die in 1 or 2 hits. And when there are tons of players trying to complete the event, the chances of someone being in the wrong spot are quite high.
Speaking of the statues, they had a major overhaul in a recent patch. Lissa, Blandrew, Dwayner and Balthasar are now actually fairly good bosses. All 3 have a real element of danger to them without being bullshit overpowered. Grenth, which was hard enough, actually got harder, and to be honest I wouldn't mind this if the fail trigger wasn't an NPC with practically no health.
There are still so many bugged, unbalanced and poorly scaled events in the game 6 months in.
I'm more infuriated by the fact that there is yet to be an MMO to really do justice the task of taking down a giant being. And don't you say a word, World of Warcraft players. Having someone the 10th the size of his opponent stand in front of it tanking while his mates stab its flank until it falls down is not epic. What is it with the mentality that stabbing the toenails of a Goliath will result in its death? Take some cues from Hollywood and see how it's done. With your bundle system, you can pull this sort of shit off. Also, if these bosses are meant to be tackled by large numbers of players, give them the fucking AI to deal with it. Don't have them focus on one player, have them focus on clumps of players and give them abilities to deal with them.
The rolling Kaka come to mind. Nothing splits a Zerg faster than one of those.
Now, onto the mechanics of the events themselves. If you want players to perform their best and work together, you need to give them incentive to do so. The current reward system for events is bullshit.
Why is it I can come in right at the end of an event, hit a few things and get a gold reward? Where's the incentive to pull my weight?
And why is it some events that can last for 10 to 20 minutes give the same bloody rewards to an event that can be completed in 2?
They really need to base the rewards on effort and participation, like they did in Warhammer Online.
It would be great if after the larger events, Karma and Gold were calculated similar to the way Glory is calculated in Player vs Player, complete with optional scoreboards so the players performing the best could show it off.
I'm not sure I like the idea of a scoreboard. We need a better system than this gold, silver, bronze crap that give no indication as to why you get that reward.
The event system could be so much more than it currently is, ArenaNet, especially when you take personal story into account.
You're not going to shut up about that, are you?
Nope. Events triggered according to player race would be great. Char in the human zones and vice versa, that would be awesome. Also, keep up the massive war effort events like the ones found in the Cursed Shore and the Harathi hinterlands. These things give a real sense of accomplishment, and when they overlap and intertwine, they can lead to some truly amazing happenings.
Work on your bosses! The Fire Elemental, the Modnir Centaur Shaman and Balthasar have great anti-Zerg mechanics that keep you on your toes without being overpowered. We need more fights like these and less like the Shatterer where people just sit in the safe zone.
And none of this defend the glass NPC bullshit like Grenth.
Balance is key. If you're not sure how to make a boss threatening to hordes of players, look to World of Warcraft's raids.
Mechanics wise, that is. We want to see more of this. And less of this.
Number 3.
You see this? This simple web page right here has become your average Guild Wars 2 player's best friend, and it's a simple editable spreadsheet.
Coming in at number 3 is the lack of a looking for group system. For those of you who don't know what this is, it's www.gw2lfg.com and is currently the best way to find a group outside of spamming local and guild chat.
In today's MMO world, you shouldn't be shipping a game without some kind of looking for group system. And no, the sorry excuse for a system your game has now does not count.
You need to implement something at least on par with the Guild Wars 2 looking for group site. Something similar to WoW's looking for group system would be even better.
I agree, something like WoW's looking for group system would be great, but I think it would be great if they could implement a looking for group system that did more than just dungeons.
Like events in the open world?
Exactly! This would be another great way to spread out player population across the zones. There'd be less fear of entering a less populated zone if the option to summon assistance was available. I can also see it being useful in World vs World, allowing commanders to summon in reinforcements towards certain areas of the map, though the method in which players were summoned would have to be implemented carefully.
I'd also like to see rewards for using a tool like this as they did in World of Warcraft. But please, no ass-dragging dogs.
I think that's it. Man, that was fast.
That's what she said. Number 2.
Hey Tex, I collected a ton of cooking ingredients for you.
Oh sweet, pass them here.
Oh yeah, I gotta mail them. Too many mails sent? Ah!
I can't see a thing with this fat-ass Norn in the way.
Oh my god, I'm trying to loot! Shut the hell up!
Coming in at number 2 is user friendliness. So many things in Guild Wars 2 are way more frustrating than they need to be.
Not being able to trade directly, coupled with limits on mail sending, is an absolute pain in the ass.
I'd love an option to make other players transparent during the jumping puzzles.
If you're going to give me the option to talk to an NPC in the middle of a battle, don't throw up a huge text window I have to close. Give them single-line speech bubbles.
And why is it so hard to target some of the larger monsters?
Why the hell can't I remap all the keys? Left control has been my push-to-talk key for over a decade. I can't click skills while using it because it links the skills to chat. Oh, and all you clicker haters can bite me.
The waypoint costs discourage their use. And can we have an option to make some of them free? Or even buy them with gems so they're free from then on?
Why is it when I edit my guild's message of the day, I cannot edit the previous entry? I have to start again from scratch?
And why is there no guild calendar? It would be so helpful when setting up guild activities and would help prevent time zone stuff-ups.
Why are some of the skill descriptions so ambiguous? Or in some cases just plain wrong?
Just be happy they work. Some of my arcane traits don't work at all.
We're covering that in point number 1. Where was I? Oh, why is there no dueling option in PvP? I'm sick of joining games and then getting yelled at for interrupting a duel game.
Why are there so many clipping issues with armor?
Why are we still talking? ArenaNet. So many things in this game just make life more difficult for your players. A lot of previous points mentioned fall into this category as well.
You have so many things that make life easier for players, like being able to sell items on the trading post from anywhere, and depositing collectibles right into our banks. Please, keep working on making the game work with the players rather than against them.
Right, only 1 point left now, and I'll bet anything, anyone who's played Guild Wars 2 for any length of time knows what it's going to be. It's number 1!
Coming in loud and clear at number 1 is polish and optimization.
This is hands down my biggest gripe in Guild Wars 2. Nothing destroys a gaming experience more than bugs, crashes, and glitches.
I want to fight the challenges set by the game, not the game itself.
Even on some high-end systems, Guild Wars 2 is not guaranteed to run well. Total Biscuit called this way back in beta as being a potential problem, and for many of us, it still is.
Aside from the game not running well, there are problems galore within the programming.
We mentioned bugged events before, which are frustrating and immersion breaking. Some of these can be caused by NPCs getting stuck, mobs not spawning, or objects not loading.
I hate when the trading post just stops working and I have to exit the game and load it up again to access
There
it.
are also glitches with the sound. Quite often, especially in the later parts of the personal story, NPCs will talk over the top of each other, sometimes even themselves.
I rarely engage
My
in
wild
combat
hunt
with
is
them.
to heal the less
Do you think the commander will listen to us now?
I've also had loading screens that never end, forcing me to restart the game.
Also, when too many people are in a single area, like during the large live events, the game becomes completely unplayable. In some parts of the Lost Shores live event, my skills had over 1 minute lag on them. 1 minute!
And what about the traits that just plain don't work? I'm looking at you, Arcane Tree.
And some skills in the personal story don't work either. The drinking contest in the Order of Whispers storyline comes to mind.
The culling system is also terrible. Yes, I can understand wanting to see players reform monsters in PvP, but not PvE. How am I supposed to stop a horde of Risen charging the NPCs we're supposed to be protecting, when they don't even load until after they've run past me?
The Play Now button in structured PvP quite often does nothing for half a minute, then complains the game I'm trying to join is full. That combined with getting thrown into games with dueling players has stopped me from using it altogether.
The further you progress into Guild Wars 2, the more bugs, glitches and overall lack of polish you encounter. I had points in my personal story when my character is referenced as doing things I'd never done. And of course we've already mentioned Zaitan and the final dungeon being a glitchy, unfinished mess, but it bears mentioning again.
We've said it once, and we'll say it again. ArenaNet, look at World of Warcraft. There are many reasons for its success, but the thing that blew me away when I first played it, EverQuest being my previous MMO, was just how polished and bug-free it was. Yes, Warcraft does have bugs that pop up now and again, but they're not something you expect, which unfortunately is more than I can say for Guild Wars 2.
I can't stress how much a buggy game makes me not want to play it.
I stopped playing World of Warcraft during the Lich King expansion because of a bug that caused my game to crash and freeze my system at random intervals. The frustration that bug caused, which was due to my graphics card being unsupported, caused me to stop playing what was then my favourite game.
This should be common knowledge. No one wants to play buggy games. At present, I'm having enough fun within the game to overlook the bugs.
I think a prime example of just how bad bugs and lack of polish can destroy games is The Witcher. When it first came out, it was filled with bugs to the point that it was nigh unplayable. It also ran terribly on most systems, there were graphical glitches galore, terrible voice acting, and it crashed randomly as well. My local gamer magazine Hyper scored it low and labelled it a mess of a game you should avoid.
And then CD Projekt released The Witcher Enhanced Edition. And what's more, they gave it to players who'd already purchased the original game for free.
The Enhanced Edition re-release optimised the performance of the game, removed the bugs and the crashes, redid the voice acting and added loads of additional features, especially in the storyline.
Does this sound familiar, ain't it?
Hyper actually re-reviewed the game, scoring it high and recommending it to all. They also praised the company for giving it for free to players who had purchased the original. The Witcher games are considered a success and highly praised in many gaming circles. Do you think this would have happened if the polish and optimization that was eventually given to it after release never happened?
Of course not, and ANET would be foolish to think that not fixing the bugs and polishing the overall Guild Wars 2 experience would not benefit them.
So there you have it, our top 10 things we believe Guild Wars 2 needs to improve.
And we mentioned World of Warcraft on nearly every point.
I know, I can see the links in Reddit already. Butthurt Guild Wars 2 fanboy admits that WoW is better.
It's not that we're saying Guild Wars 2 should be a clone of WoW, but WoW does do many things right that Guild Wars 2 would do well to emulate.
And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I've had more fun playing Guild Wars 2 than I have WoW, and I played WoW from vanilla until the end of Cataclysm. I'm not saying WoW is a bad game, I wouldn't have played it for so long if it was. It's just that WoW has become more and more about playing against other players than with them. And no, I'm not referring to the PvP. I also know there are many who think Guild Wars 2 has nothing on World of Warcraft and that it never will.
Can you honestly say that if Guild Wars 2 made all the improvements we've asked for, it wouldn't be doing better than it currently is? Would it help ANET achieve its lofty goal of the #1 MMO on the market? We're curious to hear your thoughts on the video, so please leave us some comments and let us know what you think.
We also realise that the character limit in YouTube is a bit short for a video covering this many points, so feel free to leave your comments on the Guild Wars 2 forums. There's a link to the post in the Show More section below.
Don't forget to like or dislike before you leave, and be sure to subscribe for future videos.
Thanks for watching everyone, we'll see you next time.
You could have made him fuck.
Speaking of the statues, they had a major fucker.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't want me want to go. Oh, that was awful. At least it shows you and your shit.
A bit meaty that one, wasn't it?
If you want a good fuck, I fucked it up.
I would like a good fuck, thank you very much.
In your dreams.